The cold in Colorado does not just settle on your skin. It digs deep, scraping against your bones until you forget what warmth feels like. For 68 years, I have welcomed that cold. It keeps a man sharp. It reminds him that survival is never guaranteed. My name is Jack Thompson. I am a retired mechanic, a widower, and a father. 15 years ago, when the cancer took my wife, Sarah, it felt as though the foundation of my life had been pulverized into dust. I did not break. I simply tightened my grip on the wrenches, wiped the grease from my forehead, and poured every ounce of my remaining strength into raising our only daughter, Sophia. I built my home with these very hands. Every cedar plank, every rusted nail, every concrete block in the garage was paid for in sweat and calluses. I sacrificed everything. No vacations, no new coats, no useless luxuries. I only wanted Sophia to have a straight path in life, free from the jagged edges of poverty and grief. I paid for her college, bought her a reliable car, funded her wedding to Ryan, and even let them live rent-free in the guest house sitting directly behind my property. I believed we had a bond forged in absolute trust. But trust is a fragile glass vessel. Once its hairline cracks, the water leaks out slowly until you are left holding nothing but dry air. For 3 weeks, a strange shift occurred in Sophia. The girl who used to look me directly in the eye now kept her gaze anchored to the floorboards. Every single day, she asked for the keys to my main garage. She claimed she needed to store some old boxes, but her smile was too wide, too desperate. Her hands shook, a subtle tremor that she tried to hide by tucking her fingers into her pockets. At my age, you do not need eyes to see a lie. You can smell it. It smells like damp fear and stale sweat. My instincts, owned by decades of diagnosing broken engines by their faint knocks, told me that a catastrophic failure was imminent. I refused her every time, watching the panic flicker behind her eyes before she forced another hollow laugh. I knew the value of patience. I knew that if you rush a diagnostic, you miss the root cause of the breakdown. So, I watched. I listened. I waited. On a freezing Tuesday night, sleep refused to visit me. The wind outside howled through the pines, and my mind was a chaotic engine running on high revs. At exactly 2:30 in the morning, I made a silent choice. I did not slip on heavy boots. I walked out in thick wool socks, slipping into the dark garage like a ghost. I did not flip the switches. I navigated the familiar maze of iron and steel by touch alone, positioning myself behind my old wooden workbench. The air inside was freezing, smelling of vintage oil, rubber, and cold dust. I sat there in the absolute pitch black, my breathing slow and rhythmic. I waited. The silence was heavy, almost suffocating, but my resolve was solid iron. I looked out through the small crack in the workbench, staring at the side door. The cold seeped through the concrete, numbing my toes, but I did not move. A man who has spent 40 years under the chassis of broken cars knows how to endure discomfort. At exactly 3 o'clock, the silence shattered. Soft footsteps crunched on the frozen gravel outside. The brass handle of the side door rotated with agonizing slowness. A sliver of pale moonlight cut through the opening as a figure slipped inside. The door clicked shut. A thin beam of a flashlight sliced through the darkness, dancing nervously across my tool racks. The figure moved with frantic, clumsy haste toward the back wall. That was where I kept my heavy steel safe, my most valuable diagnostic equipment, and several crates of vintage car parts worth tens of thousands of dollars on the black market. As the flashlight illuminated the lock, the glow reflected off the intruder's face. It was Sophia, my own flesh and blood. She was holding a set of tension wrenches and lockpicks, her knuckles white as she fumbled with the dial of my heavy cabinet. A physical weight crashed down on my chest, a cold pressure that made it hard to draw breath. The child I had protected from the harshness of the world was standing in my sanctuary, trying to rob me like a thief in the night. The betrayal did not make me weep. It made me cold. I reached out, my fingers wrapping around the heavy industrial switchboard, and threw the main breaker. The garage erupted in blinding, violent fluorescent light. Sophia shrieked, dropping the metal pick. It clattered loudly against the concrete floor, the sound ringing out like a gunshot in the enclosed space. She spun around, her face drained of all color, her eyes wide with animal terror. She looked at me standing there, my hands resting flat on the workbench, my expression carved from granite. "Dad," she gasped, her voice cracking as she clutched her chest. "What are you doing out here?" I stepped out from the shadows, my footsteps heavy and deliberate. I did not raise my voice. I spoke with a quiet, lethal calm. "I could ask you the exact same thing, Sophia. What are you doing in my garage at 3 in the morning with a set of lockpicks?" She collapsed onto her knees, the tears erupting instantly. She sobbed, burying her face in her hands, babbling that it was not what it looked like, that she could explain, that she was sorry. But I was done with the theater of lies. I had watched her nervous dances for weeks. I had heard her whispered phone calls in the dead of night. I walked over, picked up the dropped lockpicks, and threw them onto the metal workbench with a loud slam. "Tell me the truth," I said. Now, through her choked sobs, the ugly reality finally spilled out. It was Ryan. He had dragged them into a deep, dark hole. Secret high-stakes gambling and disastrous illegal investments had racked up an $80,000 debt with dangerous, violent men. For weeks, these collectors had been circling their lives, leaving threatening notes, making silent phone calls, and turning their existence into a living nightmare. Sophia thought that if she could steal my rare vintage parts and high-end tools, she could sell them secretly to pay off the immediate threats. She had spent weeks planning how to rob her own father to cover her husband's sins. I stood there as the cold wind rattled the metal roof of the garage. The grief of losing Sarah was a dull ache compared to the sharp, agonizing blade of this betrayal. Yet, I did not scream. I did not throw things. I dragged an old wooden stool over and pointed at it. "Sit down," I commanded. She sat, trembling violently, her chest heaving as she wept under the harsh glare of the neon tubes. She explained how Ryan had pressured her, begging her to save him, playing on her loyalty until she felt completely trapped. I listened in absolute silence, letting the toxic confession pour out until she had nothing left to say. When she finally quieted down, looking up at me with red, swollen eyes, I spoke. "You think you are clever, Sophia. You think because I am 68, my mind has rusted along with the old engines. I knew something was wrong 2 weeks ago. That is why I installed a high-definition security camera right above that cabinet. I have footage of you trying to crack that lock 3 times last week. You did not fool me. You just broke my heart." She stared at me, her mouth hanging open, utterly defeated. She looked small, shattered, and stripped of all her excuses. I did not call the sheriff. I did not banish her from my sight. Instead, I pulled out my phone and held it out to her. "Call Ryan," I said. "Tell him to get his ass over here right now." 10 minutes later, Ryan stumbled into the garage, his eyes puffy with sleep, his face twisted in nervous confusion. The moment he saw Sophia crying on the stool and me standing over them, his posture collapsed. I pointed to a pair of folding chairs near the workbench. "Sit," I said. For the next hour, under the unforgiving glare of the garage lights, I laid out the reality of their situation. I told them that every single cent I possessed was earned through decades of bone-crushing labor. I was not going to let a weak-willed gambler and a desperate daughter steal my legacy to pay off criminals. But I also looked at my daughter and saw the ghost of the woman I loved. I was not going to let them destroy themselves either. "I will help you," I announced, watching a wave of relief wash over Ryan's face. "But do not smile. This is not a gift. It is a noose." The next morning, we gathered at my kitchen table. I had already contacted my attorney and drafted the paperwork. I transferred $50,000 directly to the creditors to eliminate the immediate physical danger, but the remaining $30,000 was locked away in a strict legally binding trust. They would not touch a single dollar of it without my written, notarized approval. Furthermore, their rent-free ride in the guest house was over. I pushed a lease agreement across the table. They would begin paying a reasonable monthly rent starting the very next month. If they missed a single payment, they would be evicted. No exceptions. No fatherly leniency. Ryan tried to stammer an apology, his voice hollow and weak, but I cut him off with a single icy stare. "Your apologies are worthless to me, Ryan. Work is the only currency I accept now." Sophia signed the papers through her tears, whispering her gratitude over and over. But this time, her eyes held no deceit. They held deep, heavy shame, and for the first time in her adult life, she understood that my love was not a license to exploit me. My generosity had ironclad boundaries. In the months that followed, the atmosphere on my property shifted. It was tense, uncomfortable, but very necessary. Ryan took a grueling warehouse job that demanded long, exhausting shifts. Sophia began sending me honest financial updates instead of excuses. They worked hard to repay their $50,000 loan. Slowly, the cancer of deceit was scraped away, replaced by the clean skin of accountability. Our relationship did not shatter. It transformed into something real, stripped of childish illusions. Sophia realized that a father who loves his child does not always offer a soft cushion to fall on. Sometimes, he offers a hard floor and the strength to stand up. She was grateful I had caught her. It woke her up before she made a mistake that could have destroyed us completely. I still keep that camera running. Vigilance is the price of peace. If you notice strange behavior in your grown children, trust your instincts. Never ignore details that do not feel right. Protect your peace, your legacy, and your family with strength.